And welcome back to Southeast Texas Weekly. I'm Kevin Steele. Great to have you with us. Let's talk a little politics. What do you say? And on this particular week, as we record this political show, it's important to note that we have had, again, another terrible school shooting in America, this time in Florida, Parkland, Florida, at Marjorie Douglas High School, where we have had at least 17 people killed. We've had an extraordinary explosion of violence at a school. It is the 18th school shooting of some kind already in 2018, and we're in February. Extraordinary happenings around America. And as a result of that deadly school shooting, there are demands for answers from the American people. Let's go to our guest, WLP, Beaumont City Councilman. Great to see you, sir.
Here.
Great to see you, man. And the great Cynthia Urban, my friend. Great to have you with us from the Democratic side.
This really is the all-star team.
It's the all-star team right here. With this explosion of violence in Florida, and we see it over and over, and we saw Vegas, and we saw the outcry from the American people after Vegas for something to be done to try to curb this kind of violence. Is anyone talking about restrictions of any kind that you would be able to support? Have we restricted weaponry by way of registrations and all that as much as you would be willing to go? Is there anything else you'd be willing to do?
Well, first off, the first thing we need to do is express our condolences and our thoughts and prayers for those folks that are in Florida. When something like this happens, this is not a matter of just somebody got a gun. Somebody has some real mental issues. And that's one of the things that I think that needs to be addressed.
Mental issues.
I spent 30+ years on the Mental Health Association board, and the statistic is 1 out of 3 people actually have some sort of an emotional problem. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking it must be somebody that's coming on later, but it's certainly not us. But the point is, there are people out there with deep emotional problems that need to be addressed, and we can be more proactive there because, as we all know, before they invented guns, people were killing people. Cain killed Abel and didn't need a M16 or an AR-15.
What happened to Douglas High School? I mean, what could we do as a society to make it less likely, although I'm not sure it can be curbed entirely, make it less likely for something like this to happen?
Get rid of Democrats in get rid of Republicans in Congress.
A Freudian slip,
yes,
as we would say.
Get rid of, because the Republicans are bought and paid for by the terrorist organization called the NRA, and they're not ever going to, do anything. And he never answered your question. I mean, he talked around a lot, but he didn't answer, is there anything that we could do that he would approve of? I mean, is there any way that we can meet in the middle? You know, forget about the extremists on both sides, because we all have them.
Right.
But is there anything that normal, everyday Americans who don't have a fear of gun, who likes them, can do to make our children come home alive from school?
Well,
how is that asking too much?
Well, the point I took first and foremost is always going to be about those that were harmed first. Okay, the children and their families, you can't replace those children. You can't, there isn't enough money on the planet Earth when somebody passes away that you could say, please come back, and here's $1 million.
Americans are saying we have some kind of epidemic.
But the point is, I think when you go back and see some of the tragedies that are happening, when we get less, and this goes back to here, okay? This goes back to your heart, how you care about other people. To not be able to talk about stuff and discourse and make speech, hate speech because you don't agree with it, causes people to think they're haters and I have every right in the world to rid the world of those people. When I was growing up, my parents, I was so fortunate, I was overborn. I had better parents than I deserved, but God figured I need all the help I could get. But the point is that you treat people like you want to be treated. We didn't have anybody I can remember at French High School, guys showing up, pulling up in pickup trucks with guns in gun racks in their truck.
And we didn't have shootings
at
that rate in those days. Why was that?
That's what. Because, number one, the people that are going to spend the time to have a gun and use it for the reasons people use it for, like hunting or target practice, first thing, they're going to know safety. They're going to care that nobody gets hurt. Even in the military, the first thing that they do when they take you to a range is they say clear on the right, clear on the left, and clear down range. You don't want anybody getting accidentally hurt.
Let's roll out this discussion with Cynthia. When we talk about, and I've heard people say, you know, we don't have a gun problem in America. We have a sin problem in America. We have an anger problem in America. This appears to be a 19-year-old young man who was expelled from that school. He's angry. He may be expressing some degree of mental illness. Where do we pick up the ball and start looking into restrictions on guns or other new laws that would in some way alleviate the nation of these epidemic shootings? Because the American people are beginning to get fed up with it.
Yeah, and we should be fed up at this point. 18 school shootings since January 1st. It's horrible.
But what are real solutions in your view? Is there a sin problem in America?
I think that there's all kinds of problems in America, and I think attacking it from one position is probably not the way to go. We need to do a lot of things. I personally would like to see some things done. I think if you're on the no-fly list, you don't get to buy a weapon. I think if you're arrested, charged, or convicted with domestic violence, you don't get a weapon. And if there's some in the house, you get them out of there. I think creating a health care system that honors mental health and works with it. In Texas, we're terrible. Our Texas criminal justice system is considered the country's largest mental health facility. How do we do that as Texans? How do we accept that? That's not even close. Yes, we need to do something with that. It's a huge discussion that Republicans have never wanted to have. Just, you know, throw them out in the street.
We're going to have the discussion now, right after this break. We'll be right back after this.
Nobody in the street.
Looking for fellowship and spiritual guidance? Victory Temple is inviting you to an exciting hour of church services on KBMT ABC every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. and again Sunday night at 11:30 p.m. Jesus said the gospel was to be preached in power and demonstration of the Holy Spirit. You'll find that life of God present in these services, so be sure to join us every Sunday at 11 a.m. and 11:30 p.m.
On Southeast Texas Weekly, joined by Todd Hickman with Asset Growth Associates. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Would anyone in this group be willing to seriously consider a more liberal policy to restrict legal gun usage if someone has a mental illness brought to light in this shooting in Florida?
It's already restricted. There's a requirement under the NICS background check that every person who purchases a background goes in and does a background check. And each state has a requirement to report those issues to the NICS system. Problem is many states do not, because they have issues with HIPAA compliance and all sorts of other issues. So that already exists. And frankly, these opportunities would not exist except for good-intentioned policies like gun-free zones, where people who are law-abiding citizens, except under special circumstances, are unable to have any firearms in certain areas where these lunatics know that they can go in at will and make a name for themselves.
Yeah,
and they can count on the media.
What do you think of that notion of the gun-free zones?
Well, if you're talking about schools as a gun-free...
I am talking about schools. That's exactly right.
I have no problem claiming that schools should be gun-free. In what world do you give a bunch of teenagers access to weapons?
In the 1950s, most high schools had gun clubs where people learned how to shoot guns in high school. This isn't an issue of the gun. This is an issue.
Would it be more problematic?
And that's exactly right, because it's more to do with society than it is to do with the gun.
Or the fact that you had a 19-year-old who couldn't even buy a beer buy an AR-15. What in the world? Why would you need that?
I don't know. That's the current law.
Well, could you not restrict the students from having the guns in school, but take off the gun-free zones per se in an effort to, or even add an officer, more security officers in these schools with guns? What do you think of that notion? Some Texas schools have done.
Adamantly, completely, and without reservation, we'll never support any guns on school grounds.
So there's so much for working together.
What?
So much for common sense. As long as it's your common sense being imposed on everyone else, that's okay.
But that's my line. But what is your line?
My line is to don't make good intention law that leads to bad results. And this is one of those instances that has repeatedly led to mass deaths. Repeatedly.
So you're thinking that more guns in school is better?
I'm saying no one who is a lunatic should be able to think to themselves, you know, I'm probably going to be able to kill 20 people before someone responds to me.
But if we take away the automatic weapons, they can't kill 20 people. They could kill one.
I'm sorry. There are other solutions before you start invading on my property when I'm obeying the law.
Let's put this out there from the polls, from the surveys.
Just because you have a problem that's been created by a bad law.
But why do you need an AR-15? What do you kill besides human beings?
You don't get to determine what I do and do not need. I hate to break it to you, but you don't.
We do that every day. You need a driver's license. You have to have insurance.
No, I have to have a driver's license because the state says I have to have a driver's license.
Exactly, and you have to have car insurance, and you have to have homeowner's insurance if you're buying a vehicle.
Because the state says I have to do it because the mortgage company. But those are all voluntary things that I get to do that are not enumerated in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution.
They're not voluntary. They're told to you by the state.
If you don't own a car, you don't need a driver's license.
Right, but in this,
you know,
how are you going to get around without a car?
Well, here's the thing. I got news. I know it's hard to believe, but there are actually cities where people have never gotten a license, never wanted a license, never bought a car.
Okay, then go live in one of those cities if you don't want to own a license. You're more than welcome to do that.
I would rather you just have to deal with my rights and just get over it.
I would like to put this forth. What do you think about some of the polls that have suggested a majority of Americans might be willing to accept some restrictions on some guns in terms of maybe eliminating bump stocks, some of the mechanisms that allow for the firing of many rounds, the AR-15 used in this case. Would anyone accept that? Further restrictions?
One of the issues, and sadly, when something like this happens, rather than address the issue of this individual being mentally ill, okay, because as I mentioned, Cain still killed Abel and he didn't need an AR-15 or an M16 to do it. He killed him.
He killed one person.
Yeah,
he didn't kill the entire living
But just for the record, if you're using that book as your reference, there wasn't a whole lot of people back then.
But he didn't kill anybody but one person.
Yeah, but one out of how many that were there. You know, now we've got 7 billion people on the planet. Cain killing Abel. Abel was one of a hand. The last time I checked, the way they counted, wasn't very many. So it eliminated a good portion of the population. That being said, it always is going to come back to finding a solution, not coming up with these knee-jerk. If we did away with guns, that eliminate crime. If we eliminated this, no, I didn't. I'm not saying you said it. There are people, however, that believe it.
And there are also people who believe you ought to be able to ride tanks down the road. The extremism on both sides needs to go away.
Listen, nobody that I know has ever said, let's drive a tank down the road. However, there's people right now saying, if we eliminated guns, we would, you know.
That is not what Democrats
I didn't say. I'm not trying to
continue to hammer on the notion of possible solutions. What else could work as a solution to curbing school violence? What, in your mind, if you had to say, look, you get to make one policy change, just one, What do you think could work as far as eliminating the mass shootings at our schools? Any thought come to mind? That
I got to come back to these gun-free zones. I guarantee you, when President Obama was sending his children to private school, I guarantee you that his children had the protection of Secret Service who were packing guns. They had security.
That's not even apples and oranges. I want our political leaders' children to be protected, whether they're Democrat.
I want my children to be protected in school.
I want my children to go to school and not have to worry about the next door kid sitting next to them with a gun.
Do we think if we had more security officers in schools with guns that they would be safer?
Let me ask you a quick question. If you go to the bank, they only have money there.
And they protect it with guns.
And they protect it with guns. We've got the most precious thing, human life, and we're going, let's just let anybody walk in there that's crazy.
That is not what we're saying.
No, but that's reality. That's what they're doing.
I think we could do 5 things that would be a beginning step. Just little things.
Okay, quickly. Very quickly.
Use the laws that we've got on the books.
Yes.
Convict people who have loaded weapons that children get to and kill themselves for negligent homicide. That's not an accident. That's negligent homicide. When children get a hold of guns.
Okay.
Okay. Number 2, reduce the amount of bullets in the clips. We don't need 30 clip bullets.
No.
Do a 10 clip bullet.
No.
If you're on the no-fly list, don't buy a weapon. If you're involved in domestic violence, you don't get a weapon.
That's
and those
already
weapons
law.
come out of
That's already law.
That's not true, because that got backed off. That got reversed. Oh, it got
5 solutions. I like the fact that we've got some potential solutions there, and I have to run.
And it's not even talking about gun control or taking guns off. These are just small baby steps.
Good ideas. Good conversation, guys. We appreciate it. We're back with more on Southeast Texas Weekly in just a moment. We'll continue in just a moment. We'll continue to hammer out this notion of what might be a solution in the gun violence epidemic in America after this.
Have you lost a loved one due to overdose from a prescription painkiller? Drugs such as OxyContin, codeine, or Dilaudid have been linked with addiction, injury, and death. Drug companies have improperly promoted the use of these drugs. Please call Waldman Smallwood at 833-9151.
Which high school students' athletic abilities are the talk of the town? Find out every Wednesday night at 10 on 12 News Athlete of the Week, brought to you by Wendy's.
Have you lost a loved one due to overdose from a prescription painkiller? Drugs such as OxyContin, codeine, or Dilaudid have been linked with addiction, injury, and death. Drug companies have improperly promoted the use of these drugs. Please call Waldman Smallwood at 833-9151.
KBMT, we are 12 News, where you can expect more.
On the heels of another tragic school shooting, this time in Parkland, Florida, Governor Rick Scott making comments now about taking guns out of the hands of the mentally ill. He believes it could plausibly have been important in this particular case in reducing the potential for bloodshed. 17 dead in Parkland, Florida. Does Florida Governor Rick Scott have a point on this? Kit Batman, Jeff Lewis, and Godfrey Leggett here to talk about this notion. Does Governor Scott have a point to the larger issue? Should we do a better job in this country of making sure that the mentally ill can't get access to guns?
We should just do a better job of taking care of the mentally ill, which means we need to have universal single-payer health care so that nobody has to worry about paying a damn insurance bill. They'll get treated.
Of our viewers would agree with that.
We are.
And that goes to the second part of my question I hadn't got out yet, which was the second part of that question is what would that look like? How would you get guns out of the hands of somebody?
Well, first, how do you deliver mental health care to people that are poor? How do you do that?
I thought we were talking about the school shooting.
Yeah, I thought we were too.
But the guy that did the shooting was mentally challenged. He was,
he was turned into the FBI, and they didn't investigate.
They dropped the ball.
Well, that's the question. Was he diagnosed?
Let's see here.
Too. Was he diagnosed?
Not really diagnosed.
Oh no, he's wearing a communist T-shirt on Facebook. So I mean, he must have been mentally disturbed.
And a Muslim sign on his shirt.
Yeah, people sent these things into the FBI, and the FBI kind of made a cursory inspection of it. But somebody should have went and knocked on the boy's front door and talked to him.
Right. You know? So on the larger question, though, how do we decide in this country who is mentally anguished enough to become a threat.
We can't. The point is we have to investigate these things. We've been told if you see it, say it, and we've been turning that stuff in. If nobody is investigating it, it doesn't matter what the law says about
we're being
having
told.
guns. They're not following up. They're not doing the job. The other thing is, why does a school have open doors on the hallways, and why is there no police officer on campus?
Jeff Lewis.
Yeah, valid question on there. We're being told by the left.
We got.
I'm sorry.
Come on.
We're being told by the left that it's the federal government's role to do everything we just said, and it's our argument that no, it's not. We need local enforcement to do their job. Okay, many of the laws that we've heard discussed in previous segments are on the books. It's just the question of do we actually enforce what's in place, and the answer has been regrettably no. I do think that we need to address the mental side of things. I mean, clearly this guy is disturbed, but is it the federal government's role to step in and take action here?
So, and that's the interesting thing. We just this week, prior to this taping, we had somebody in a standoff with a SWAT team in Beaumont, a man who had a weapon inside his home. In this case, there were some previous instances in which this person might have. But I guess what I'm getting at from Vegas on, if you just take that threshold, from the Vegas shooting on, when do we find out whether somebody is mentally ill? When do we find out that they're anguished to the point that they would need treatment? Do they need to be diagnosed before we would consider something? Because the American people, whether we like it or not, are in the polls. If the polls are correct, they're suggesting an outcry of doing something to curb these
The fellow in Vegas that did the shooting was probably mentally deranged too, okay? Doesn't excuse what he did. But we really should do a better job of identifying these people and helping them. You got to identify them first. How do you do that? You know.
Yeah, but these guys that you're talking about, that one and this one, were identified. Nobody followed through on it.
Well,
we've got laws in place, but nobody's followed through on it. And the other thing is, he was turned over to the FBI. You know, we made the comment about local law enforcement, but the FBI has the responsibility.
So now we need federal help to get everything tied together.
In this kind of situation,
yes, we always need
that's the job of the FBI. If, on the other hand, they're creating fake dossiers to go after political candidates, no, we don't want that.
They're creating real dossiers to take Trump down is what they're trying to do.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
You just
I think you just validated what I said.
So, okay, bump stocks. Big problem. Too many rounds.
It wasn't
ammo.
Wasn't used in this case. If you were going to go shoot somebody on campus, I think you'd probably do it with a pistol. To carry a long gun on a campus where my kids went, where they had a police officer, he wouldn't have made it up to the school.
Not applicable in this particular. In the Vegas situation. I guess what I'm getting at is more what do we as a nation do to do something because you know, the outcry already has been that the president today came forward and said so many signs the Florida shooter was mentally disturbed, even expelled from school for bad and erratic behavior. Neighbors and classmates knew he was a big problem. Must always report such instances to authorities again and again. And he's already being criticized for saying we should do something, but what?
We have to ask ourselves how much intervention do we want to stomach, okay? I think we need to stomach quite a bit, though. This kid was a social outcast from the time he was young.
He might have been, before he was expelled, he might have been determined as a potential threat.
Yes,
I mean, if you think
but how do you do that, Kevin? How do you identify that?
And would America
and how do you keep a kid from getting a gun? I mean, you can get a gun illegally.
Well, one thing would be to have a database that really works, because our database that we have to prevent.
In this case, we didn't need the database. They had the information that he was a problem, and nobody investigated it.
Really, like Cynthia was saying earlier, it's not just one thing to do. It's 5 or 6 things we need to do.
And if we enforce the laws that are on the books, we'd have gotten a lot further with most of these.
We would have.
Most of these, everybody involved was breaking, not most, all of them. They were all breaking a law. If we would enforce the laws, we wouldn't have this.
Well, why don't we do that?
Prior to shooting.
And if you think about the infrastructure bill that was just passed to do a better job with our roads and bridges and that kind of thing, I think there will be a cry to say, let's go ahead and get local law enforcement prepared for this kind of thing. Because evidently it's too hard to turn the information over to the FBI and trust that they're turning it over to law enforcement and that they're following up to see that it got investigated.
I think we should expect our internet service providers and our people like Facebook and Twitter They should capture words that...
There's something to that.
Somebody needs to help identify.
In all honesty, when Kathy Lee Griffin was holding up a fake head that looked like Donald Trump's, don't you think that should have been turned in? That's the kind of mental health stuff that we just say, wait a minute, that's unacceptable.
And I think that's speaking to a larger point.
She's a comedian. Do you think she was...
The source of all this.
Jeff Lewis,
it was unacceptable.
I've got to control the conversation here so people can hear.
The source of all this you pointed to is the anger that we're seeing, because so much divisiveness over fringe issues but even significant issues has driven us to the point of madness. And we're constantly bickering at each other, and we think it's okay because it's virtual. And it's not okay.
Society of
sorts,
and
we've gotten to the point where we're desensitized to the reality of violence, and that's the problem. Yes, there is a sin problem in our country. I know that Claudia didn't want to say it, but we do have a sin problem. We do have a mental problem with how we handle ourselves.
And then after that break, we'll talk about the 4 Pillars test and immigration reform in this country right after this break.
This February, turn your tax refund into new furniture at either area Boomtown Furniture location. No one gives you more for less, with incredible savings on living rooms, bedrooms, dining rooms, and more. All marked with the area's guaranteed lowest prices. Plus, Boomtown offers no interest financing, no credit financing, and same-day delivery. Shop and save at boomtownfurniture.com or visit us on Texas Avenue in Bridge City or at 1290 South 11th in Beaumont.
Turning in the grain again, the bells began to chime. Time, she said.
You can pass down a Subaru Forester, but you get to keep the memories.
Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
Get 0% APR financing on all new 2018 Subaru Forester models now through February 28th.
Welcome back to Southeast Texas Weekly. The president has said he has a 4-pillar test for getting an immigration reform bill, a major bill. He wants to get rid of the visa lottery program as it exists, get rid of chain migration in America, get a wall, and he wants to end the dreamer scenario and get something passed on the DACA. And the Grassley bill, the Chuck Grassley bill of Iowa, seemingly would do all of these things. And yet we have a snag, and the deadline looms. The majority leader has said that Friday is more or less the immediate deadline to get things really done, because it has to get through back over to the House. Nothing's moving on this whole matter of immigration reform, which has been crowded out of the headlines, by the way, by the school shooting. We're going to give it just a moment here. If you had to propose a compromise to get through this and get an immigration bill passed, what would it be?
Well, it would be what's proposed.
What's already?
If you look at it, those things have all been approved by both sides at one time or another.
Well, the House is not quite happy with it, you know.
But potentially there's issues at the House, but it's only a 50% majority. In the Senate is where you got the problem, and it looks like a lot of those senators are actually talking. I think there's a potential that something could happen.
How many times have I said we need to talk more? Because we do, you know.
Yeah, the sides need to
talk a lot.
I know, but I'm talking about the senators and Congress. But they need to talk more.
They do.
Do you like the bill? The Grassley bill as it currently stands? It seemingly would satisfy all
I have not read it yet.
Yeah.
Okay, from the surface of what I've seen talked about, I like it, I don't love it. We'll see. Devil's into so many of the details.
You're prepared to allow a pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million dreamers.
I've said for about 5 to 6 years on this show that I don't think it's the fault of the immigrants that are here illegally. We have a broken system, because if I was down in broken Mexico, I'd be trying to get here as fast as I could, and I really wouldn't care what the law was.
Is this a good deal for Democrats?
We need to make it. We need to give a path to citizenship.
We need to have
people that know what they're doing.
We need to have actual working immigration system.
Yes.
That people can come over here and say, I want to work in your country picking avocados or whatever. I have a technical job. It's going to be a year and I'll work here. We need to get this stuff done. We also need to track those people. We need to know where they're at in this country.
And it doesn't need to be 20 years.
Thanks so much, Ray. We appreciate it. And thank you for watching on Southeast Texas Weekly. We'll see you next time.